What is the most important lesson that we can take from this episode?
Dual lands aren't worth it. Buy every single other card first.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things cEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan.
And I am your host, Callahan, and today we are going to be talking about the most important cards to have in your cEDH collection. If you're looking to spend some money on some cEDH cards, where can you get the most bang for your buck? But speaking of bucks, we have to pay the bills. Our merchandise is now available in our store. We have dice, coins, playmats, tokens, sleeves, and more, all available now. Go to playingwithpowermtg.com and help support the channel. You can also support us on Patreon. Patreons get access to our Discord, webcam leagues, play days, early access to videos, names in the credits of our show, exclusive videos, merchandise, and even the ability to be on an episode. There are tiers for everyone, so go to patreon.com/playingwithpowermtg and help support the show. Also, if you're looking to sponsor the podcast, please reach out to Ryan's amazing email below or in the show notes.
That's right. My awesome email.
His awesome email. It says Ryan in it.
It says Ryan. I'm so creative. And in every single episode, we do a Patreon shout out. And today's Patreon shout out goes to the patron with no name.
Thank you, the patron with no name.
We kid you not. That's actually their name in Patreon. That's so cool. We think that's hilarious. Thank you, patron with no name. They who shall not be named or whatever. Okay, so go ahead and kick us off into the main topic, Cal.
Yes, as I said up top, today we're talking about a wide swath of different cards that will that you kind of just have to have in your cEDH collection. These are cards that are widely cross-deck applicable that will get you a really long way. If you own one, it can go into a lot of different decks. And in that way, they'll earn you a lot of bang for your buck. You can pay X amount of money and get a big power up for your deck or a big amount of flexibility for your entire cEDH collection. But, of course, there is something we need to say first. The cEDH community is incredibly proxy friendly. Almost anywhere you go where you can play cEDH games, people will probably be using proxies. I almost exclusively use proxies. I have an all-real deck that I love very much. I own plenty of Magic the Gathering cards, but when it comes to cEDH, that stuff's so expensive. So many cards are so pricey that it's proxy town over here.
Yep. Basically, when we're talking about, hey, what's a card you should own, and we come up with a card that might be in the several $100s. Spoilers, some of them are. Guess what? You can only actually pay about 25 cents for one because we are a very proxy-friendly community. So there is absolutely nothing in today's podcast that says that you have to own this card if you want to play cEDH. Absolutely not. Proxy-friendly, proxy everything that you have, but just know that sometimes there are people who don't want to proxy, or there's certain LGSs that don't allow you to proxy. And so what today's episode is going to be is, if I'm going to go ahead and maybe pull the trigger on investing in some cards, which ones are going to not pigeonhole me into a certain deck? Yes, Bazaar of Baghdad is a crazy expensive and crazy good card, but that applies to maybe one cEDH deck out there, maybe two, and you're going to not have the flexibility in the future with such a significant investment to be able to pivot to other decks that you may like, especially when you're first starting out in cEDH. So today's list is going to be more about those generic, just really powerful, really versatile, really flexible cards that if you start in a certain deck and then maybe want to pivot to another one later, you're not rebuying 3/4, 80% of the deck. You've got most of it already because it's in the form of staples.
Exactly. And where are we pulling all of these cards from today? Well, number one, we play quite a bit of cEDH, so I think we have a little bit figured out, but we're also looking at the cEDH Staples list, which is a great community resource we have talked about plenty of times on the podcast before, that pulls from the cEDH deck list database. It kind of compiles all the cards that are most commonly present in all of those decks, and it puts it into one big list for your viewing pleasure.
Yep. So the cEDH Staples list, which is at cedhstaples.com, will take you to Yeah, super simple. We own the domain. I made it a long time ago because I was tired of sending people to a random tapped out link or a random Moxfield link. That's how long it's been around. But it's a community curated project that allows you to see kind of what the meta looks like. If you're looking for a silver bullet card or something like that, the cEDH staples list will tell you kind of what you're going to be facing, what most decks are going to contain, but it also has the side effect of allowing you to see what the most common cards are and the most versatile cards, because what the cEDH staples list does is it takes all the decks, like Cal just said, aggregates them all, and finds out what the frequency of certain cards are going to be, and then kind of ranks them. It also gives you the ranking over time, so you can see if something is growing or dropping in a certain meta. And it's a very useful tool. We highly recommend you check it out and keep an eye on it. But it also allows you to see what cards are most used in decks and which ones will be the most bang for your buck.
Exactly, exactly. And we are going to start off in the most, perhaps the most predictable way possible. First up, we are going to talk about mana rocks. There's a big kind of stereotype out there that the difference in between cEDH and EDH is the presence of really powerful mana rocks and all that kind of stuff. And that's like not true, but it is like 10% true. So much of what makes cEDH so powerful in the first place is the ability to cast very powerful spells very quickly. And a massive part of what enables that is these very, very powerful mana rocks that you can cast for 0 mana or 1 mana that net you mana every single time you activate them. And we're starting off with the granddaddy of them all, something that I would say is maybe the most important cEDH card that you could buy if you were going to go out and buy a card for your cEDH collection right now. That is Mana Crypt. 0 mana, taps for 2 colorless mana every single turn. That casts your commander quickly. It casts your Adnaz quickly. It casts any spell you could want to have. It accelerates you so fast. And in return, you have a 50% chance to take less than 10% of your life total in damage every single turn. You got to have a Mana Crypt if you're going to be buying real cEDH cards.
There is a reason this card is $200, and it's actually not cEDH. So a lot of people say this is a cEDH card. Oh, someone drops a Mana Crypt. Oh, you playing cEDH today? No, there's a reason it's $200, and it wasn't cEDH that brought it up to $200. It was Commander in general that brought it up to $200. When it became more and more widely available, we saw this starting to flow into other decks. Now, those decks might be more on the high power side, but Mana Crypt is not $200, or at least very, very expensive as the time of this recording is maybe what I should say. But as the time of this recording, it's hovering around $190 to $210. And that's a lot of money for a Magic card. But, we saw 50-cent cards become, $10 cards inside of the realm of cEDH's influence, your Mystic Remors, your Demonic Consultations and stuff like that. But Mana Crypt is really, really expensive, but it's for a reason. It's probably the card I would recommend everyone to buy if they had a certain amount of money, because it will go in every single one of your decks. Full stop. There is not a single deck that Mana Crypt doesn't benefit that deck in some way. So if you're looking to have a card that is absolutely pivotal to being as flexible as possible, because you're not exactly sure where you want to land on the cEDH spectrum from an archetype standpoint, Mana Crypt's pretty much going to go into that deck. So it's a pretty safe bet to make that purchase.
Yep, exactly. Mana Crypt, we're trying not to date ourselves too much with prices here, but Mana Crypt, it'll always be pricey. Even when it's reprinted, you might be able to grab it for $90.
Yeah.
But before you know it, it'll be 150, 200 again.
Yes.
Speaking of cards that are always being reprinted and then creeping back up in price a little bit, next up is a card that you maybe already have a few of, but you could probably always use more of. That's Sol Ring. If you don't have any Sol Rings already, go grab one. They're $2 max.
They're $2.
They get printed every single. The crazy thing about Sol Ring is they get printed massively in every single set release now, thanks to the Commander precons with every single set, and it's still a $2 card. They've printed this card so many times. There are so many Sol Rings in existence. I cannot imagine how expensive Sol Ring would be if they printed it like only once a year.
Oh gosh. Well, I remember before Commander as a product became a normal thing, Sol Rings are climbing up to $30, $40, $50 because you could only really get them in revised. Like it was never really printed, with the exception of like that foil one in the From the Vault. And they were getting expensive because Commander was definitely growing in popularity, and it was legal. It was like, it's such a crazy broken card, and it's so ubiquitous now that people don't realize how broken it is, but it's so unbelievably broken. There's not a whole lot else to say about Soul Ring that hasn't been said to death. It's an amazing card, and it's only $2. I'm sure you already have one. I'm sure you already have 10, more than likely. But that also goes back to Mana Crypt, by the way. Mana Crypt is better than Soul Ring. If that shows you how busted Mana Crypt is. So it's better than Soul Ring. Anyway, so yeah, nothing else much to say about Soul Ring unless there's something else you want to say about it. But Soul Ring's an amazing card. It should go in every single cEDH deck.
We kind of just had to say it. We hope you already have some Soul Rings. If you don't, do yourself a favor and buy 5 of them. You'll use them.
Go get a 10 spot and go grab 5 of them right now. All right, so next on our list is some more mana rocks that could go in pretty much every single cEDH deck. The next one is Chrome Mox. It is on the expensive side. It has been, growing in price over the last couple of years. But basically, it's a free 0 drop. You have to imprint a card from your hand. So basically, you have to go down a little bit in card advantage to gain a little bit of mana advantage. Still a fantastic card. It is getting reprinted usually mostly exclusively inside of special sets like master sets and stuff like that. But Chrome Mox is one of those cards that just really belong in just about every single cEDH deck there is. There's a reason that they call these types of cards what we call the Power Four. And Chrome Mox definitely belongs in that. If you wanted to start out with a clean slate of a deck and all you had was your commanders, the first 4 slots would be these cards. So we have Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Chrome Mox, and then a 4th one, which we'll get here in just a second. But basically, this is why they belong in everyone. Versatility of color. It's not just tapping for colorless. You have a lot of options available to you, and it's free acceleration. What else is there to say about Chrome Mox?
Exactly. Chrome Mox, in return for only giving you 1 mana, and in return and taking a card, gives you colored mana. That's pretty awesome. If you can exile a gold card with it, maybe, if you have a gold card in your opening hand that you're not using, it'll make you all the colors that you could need. But again, I think even Chrome Mox being an absolute must play does bring into relief how absolutely busted Mana Crypt is, but I digress. It'll cost you a card, but it makes you colored mana for 0 mana. This card also a little on the pricier side for sure, but it hasn't been reprinted a while, and in that context, it was technically just reprinted in a Secret Lair product that was fairly limited in scope and production run. But past that, hasn't been reprinted super duper recently, and has not gotten, has not gotten Mana Crypt expensive, because this card is played in Legacy. It's played in cEDH. It doesn't exactly have the metagame share in normal EDH or what have you as some of these other cards do, and it's not on the reserve list or something like that. So it will get reprinted. This is one of those cards where I'd say like maybe wait for a reprint and snag it while it's 40% off from its current price or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it will really up the power of your deck in return for not that much money.
Yep. All right, now we're getting into crazy expensive territory. So the next one we have on our list is the number 4 of what you would call a Power 4 in the cEDH world, and that is Mox Diamond. This is a reserve list card. This is kind of like Chrome Mox, where you have to pitch a card in order to have it enter the battlefield, and you have to pitch a land to do it, and it's free. It is a free, mana accelerator. It is an amazingly powerful card. It is also amazingly expensive. It is so pricey, and the price changes on this way too much to really say how expensive it is at the current time, because we could outdate ourselves tomorrow. But basically, when you're talking about holy smokes, that's like a car payment, or that could be. It's just such a significant amount of money. Mox Diamond is on there, but there's a reason it's a Power 4 card. It is so unbelievably powerful. It's so strong, and these 4 cards are kind of what become ubiquitous and quintessential cEDH cards. Number 1, because of their price, but number 2, because of their power. How you crack Adnos piles with it, and you can accelerate and power up commanders with it. And there's just so much you could do with this. There's so many things that you could do. It's almost hard for me to say this is what this card is used for, because it's used for everything. It's just such a great card, but its price tag reflects that. also legacy legal or in eternal format legal. So that also makes it really, really difficult from a price perspective, but very, very strong card.
And most importantly, it is unfortunately on the reserved list. So the copies of Mox Diamond that exist are the copies of Mox Diamond that are going to exist. We got a little lucky that it is one of the few cards, one of the few reserved list cards that they did try the loophole on, where they were like, oh yeah, we can print fancy versions of this card. So there is a From the Vault printing of Mox Diamond, which I assume makes it infinitely more accessible than it would have been otherwise. I don't want to imagine what a Mox Diamond price would be if there wasn't the From the Vault printing, which is also significantly more expensive than the original printing, by the way,
Yep.
which is because it looks cool. It's
And
shiny.
it's the foil.
It's the
A
foil. Yeah.
foil reserve list card. Get
You
out of
can
here!
have a
Wow.
foil, or you can have a heavily played card from, I don't even remember what set it is. It has a little door as,
Stronghold.
yeah,
It's from
stronghold
Stronghold.
as
Yeah.
the expansion symbol. But yeah, Ryan pretty much already said it all. It's a 0-drop. Discarding a land can be a pretty big cost. Mox Diamond might be one of the worst top decks possible in a cEDH deck. But when Mox Diamond is popping, Mox Diamond is popping, giving you all your colors. You don't have to get rid of a usable card. Lands are very strong. You have to discard a land, pretty big cost, but you don't have to exile something. It doesn't have to be a non-land, non-artifact card like Chrome Mox does. It has to be
Yep.
a land. But definitely very low on the bang for your buck scale. But if it is a card that you can afford and would like to own, heavily recommend it.
And it's very expensive. Yep. All
Very
right.
happy I got mine before the third to last major price spike.
Yeah. Thank goodness. Yeah. I was around when they were printed. Anyway, so
Back when I was in college, right? I finally scraped enough money together to buy my $50 Mox Diamond.
That's right. Couldn't believe how pricey they were. It was unbelievable.
I can't believe I passed on that $120 Tropical Island, Ryan. I tell you what.
Buy
We'll
my
get there.
plateaus for $50 and my Gaia's Cradles for $50. Thank you very much. I'm old. So, all right. So let's get into the next one. So the next one we have is a more recent printing, all things being relative. It is Jeweled Lotus. This card is very expensive because it's basically Black Lotus and Commander. I once again, what else is there to say about this card, Cal? But except for it's very powerful. Power out your Commander, which is the crux of your deck and the center point and usually centerpiece of your deck. And you power it out as early as turn 1. That's an amazing ability. Jewel Lotus is a powerhouse. It is an amazing card and probably a must own.
I think Jeweled Lotus was probably, along with the rest of the cards that came along with Commander Legends, most notably the one color partners. I think
Yes.
Jeweled Lotus was the last card that we've gotten that like truly threw cEDH on its head. The ability to be able to cast commanders so much more easily, kind of instantly changed the dynamics of which cEDH commanders were like quote unquote playable or quote unquote best. We already knew Najeela was really good, but being able to cast Najeela off of a single mana rock, really good. We already knew that Crom was, pretty strong, but it became much more evident how strong Crom could be when you could, again, very easily cast him on turn 1 or 2. We already knew that Brea was kind of going out the door as far as like 4-color artifact deck goes or whatever, but when you can't really cast her off of your Jeweled Lotus easily, that just like knocks her down the power rankings of 4-color options that much more. Jeweled Lotus kind of redefined a lot of how we think about commanders in cEDH. It's Black Lotus, but for your commander, what else can you say about it? And
Exactly.
it's not that pricey either. It used to be pretty expensive. It's less expensive now. It's still expensive. It's still
expensive.
Pricey. It's not reserve list pricey. And it will be reprinted, and they will continue to reprint it. So it's one of those cards that you could be patient with if you really want to and buy it while it's quote unquote on sale. But it's, of all of these cards, I think it's like you have to own Mana Crypt and then you have to own Jeweled Lotus.
Yeah, I would agree that if I was going to give people a list, I would not rank it by price. I would rank it by its ubiquity. And Mana Crypt does come as number one. I don't know of a single deck that doesn't benefit from Mana Crypt, save for somebody in the comments who would like to tell me which deck doesn't utilize Mana Crypt well. So please feel free to let us know what that is. But Jeweled Lotus is definitely one of the ones that I would rank very highly. It does have the restriction of only your commander, but who cares? You want to usually cast your commander to win the game. And I think that's a very interesting point that you put out, which is, they're pre-Commander Legends, the Breas and the Yidrises and stuff used to be much higher tier decks. And that's because the format was slower. But once you realize that you could power out higher mana value commanders very easily with Jeweled Lotus, that really turned things upside down. It really turned things on its head. Crom used to be a bad commander. People are like, it's so expensive. Why? I can't cast that card. It's too. But all of a sudden, now that you've added a 3 mana boost to your deck, you have other cards that do that as well. But now that you've created a certain critical mass or a certain density of it, casting this card, casting your commander off of this card very quickly suddenly became more viable, and it allowed us to speed up the format a lot. And it was because of Jeweled Lotus. So very powerful card, very important card. I agree 100%. Very good card.
It is single use, which some people really try to get on, but so is the next card on our list, Ryan. That is Lotus Petal. Lotus Petal, relatively affordable. You might say, why would I play a card in my 99 or 98 that is pretty much just a treasure token? Oh, you sweet summer child. You are so spoiled. Treasure tokens are so busted. Lotus Petal, you gotta play Lotus Petal.
Yep.
Being able to pay 0 mana and in return get a burst of 1 mana is incredibly strong. We've been talking about, pay 0 to get 2 every turn. Yeah, really strong. Pay 0 plus a card to get 1 every turn. Very strong. Yeah, but pay 0, no downside. Sacrifice your Lotus Petal, get a mana back. You just got to do it. It'll help you cast your commander on turn 1. It'll help you cast your game-winning spells a turn ahead of time. It just checks all the boxes.
Yeah. There's nothing else to say. It's treasure. And this also shows you how powerful treasures are. When you actually you want to run a copy of treasure in your 99, that shows you how powerful treasures are as a mechanic. But Lotus Petal, fantastic card, and it's relatively affordable. Yeah, I mean, it's not a 50-cent card by any means, but it's, most people can afford this card. And I highly recommend that I highly recommend that you buy this. You purchase this card. It's a very, very good card. It goes in any cEDH deck. It's very good.
I definitely agree. And that is all of the rocks we have for kind of the must have. If you're sitting down and you're saying, let's buy all of the mana rocks for a cEDH deck, these are the mana rocks you are going to want to buy. These are the rocks that will form the foundation of pretty much every single cEDH deck. These are the cards that will let you power out your other very powerful cards much faster than you would otherwise. But we're not done yet, Ryan. We still even have a couple more mana rocks here. What are they?
So we're going to gloss over this one relatively quickly. It's the kind of the secondary ones that don't go in all cEDH decks, but it does go into a lot of them. So we're going to just run through it real quickly. It's Mox Opal, Mana Vault, and Grim Monolith. Not everyone needs these particular rocks in every single one of their decks. They're very valuable and very potent in a lot of decks, but not every deck is going to have a critical mass of artifacts that allow you to turn on Mox Opal. Not every deck is going to want you to power out something like whatever it might be through something like Mana Vault or Grim Monolith. So while these are very powerful and we do definitely recommend them in the right decks, they don't go in every single deck automatically like the ones that we just talked about. You could jam what we just talked about in just about any deck, but these ones don't go in every deck, but they do go in a lot of decks. So if you are kind of already on to a certain archetype, such as let's say a turbo strategy, you're probably going to want to buy these cards because you're always going to have some sort of or some variation of these types of rocks because you're always going to be playing something like turbo and they're always going to have a home no matter what type of turbo you end up playing.
Yep, like Ryan said, all of these rocks are very strong, but they all do kind of have a downside. Number one, all 3 of these rocks are very pricey, especially Grim Monolith, which is, again, on the reserve list. It's got the reserve list price. You can get a foil if you really want. That's got
It's
a
only
real
four
reserve.
grand,
Yeah,
by the way.
exactly. It's right now it's only 4 grand.
Yeah.
Uh, but Mana Vault hasn't been reprinted in a minute. It's quite pricey. Mox
It
Opal.
got reprinted in Double Masters 2022. So,
Oh, it did. Okay.
yeah. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's cheap,
It
but
got reprinted recently enough. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Okay.
it's not cheap, but it's also not like Grim Monolith
Yeah,
expensive.
exactly. And then Mox Opal will always run you a couple bucks. But like Ryan said, all of these are kind of a little more niche. Mox Opal, you kind of have to have all the other rocks that we talked about today, plus maybe like Felwar Stone and Arcane Signet, maybe a talisman, and then your Mox Opal will always be online.
Yes.
Your Mana Vault and your Grim Monolith, you need to have a deck that wants to pay 1 mana to get 3 mana or 2 mana to get 4 mana in a one-time burst, because you're not on top of your Mana Vault or your Grim Monolith. You have to want that mana for something. Like, a lot of decks like to play Mana Vault because turning 1 colorless mana into the 3 colorless mana that is required for Adnaz is pretty good. It's pretty strong.
Or Crom. Yep.
Exactly, or Crom. So these rocks, they're strong, maybe not as strong as all the rest, but you'll want to pick them up eventually if you're really trying to finish up your cEDH collection.
Yep. Definitely a your mileage may vary type situation.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Card Conduit. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value of my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have 3 main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best buy list price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would have from a major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list price against the specific condition of a card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the show notes or the description, or use the promo code POWER, you'll also get 10% off their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's podcast.
Okay. Let's go on to the next category, which is land. So we're going to just dive right into it. The first one that every land that we think everyone should own is Gemstone Caverns. Speaking of the worst top deck in your deck, Gemstone Caverns takes the cake. Some people say Mox Diamond, but I think Gemstone Caverns is definitely up there. Not really a whole lot to say, except for it's just a free mana acceleration if it's in your opening hand. Pre-game actions, Gemstone Caverns, Exile, whatever. So it's got the ability like a mana rock, but it's also on a land. So you can do turn 0 tutors. You can do all kinds of different valuable and very powerful things with it. That's why so many decks run Gemstone Caverns. This one extra land that you can have on the battlefield turn 0 gives you such a leg up when you're playing this game.
Yeah, Gemstone Caverns is pretty much unparalleled, I think, in power level as far as mana acceleration goes. Mana Crypt, again, Mana Crypt probably beats it out. Soul Ring maybe beats it out. But Gemstone Caverns is a land that you're going to want to play in your cEDH deck. The ability to cast an instant on your turn 0 before you untap to tutor something on the top of your library, unparalleled. The ability to just have 2 lands in play on your turn 1 without having to spend any resources except for having to exile a card, unparalleled. You said it might be a worse top deck than Mox Diamond. I don't think that's quite true, because you can still play it and it'll still tap you for a colorless mana
I
rather than
guess.
rotting away in your hand for 7 turns or what have you until you can get an extra land that you want to discard to
It's
it.
it's debatable, but they're in the top two.
Yes,
They're
exactly. They're
brutal. They're
number
brutal.
1A and 1B, Mox Diamond and Gemstone Caverns. Yeah. But Gemstone Caverns, you'll want to pick it up. It will go into the mana base of pretty much any cEDH deck. I know some people are like, why would I put it into my mono green deck? Well, because it lets you have 2 lands on turn 1. It lets you have a land on turn 0. It's the only way you can make mana on turn 0 that we play in cEDH, except for the spirit guides.
Literally, except for spirit guides
Yeah,
and this. That's it.
yeah, exactly. So as far as busted mechanics for our busted sub-format, the weirdo way of playing the Magic the Gathering goes, pick up a Gemstone Cavern. Your deck power level and your deck will thank you.
Yes, very much. Next one on the list is the fetch lands. No surprise here, but really, we wanted to rank the fetches above any other colored sources that we might have on this list because of just their versatility and their ubiquity. You can smooth out any other mana base so long as you have your fetches. Plus, you can play off-color fetches and things like that. You know, let's say that you have a deck that is in white but not blue. You can still play Flooded Strand and use that. And it's just so powerful for smoothing out your mana base. You want to run as many as you can in there to make sure that you're always hitting the colors that you need. It's very, very powerful. They were reprinted into oblivion with Modern Horizons 2, so they are still very affordable right now. There's not a whole lot to say. Fetches are fantastic. They're great. They smooth out your deck. They thin your deck. There's been articles and videos written about fetches forever, and they're very valuable to have, and they should go into every cEDH deck that could use them. There could be something to be said about monocolored. I don't really want to get into the nuance of that today, but fetches are very, very powerful.
I think the argument could be made that as far as Magic as a long-term game goes, there was maybe no larger design mistake in the history of the game from certain aspects than the fetches. They kind of entirely circumvent one of the core limiters on the game itself, which is the color restriction system. You can't play too many colors because, man, your mana will just be terrible. You'll have a pile of white cards in your hand and a pile of all the other lands in the play, or vice versa. And the fetches just let you entirely sidestep that. You just get to, the fetches, since you can crack your black-red fetch and go and get a red-blue land, or a black-blue land, or a black-green land, or a black-red land, you can get pretty much from one fetch. You can go and get any combination of like the 4 colors if you're playing a 5-color deck. No, you can get any color, any combination color,
any
from
color,
any
from
combination from one fetch.
Yep, any fetch.
If you're a 5-color deck. So they just make your mana easy.
Yep.
Even if you have the lesser targets to go and get, we'll talk about that in a minute here. They just make your mana infinitely easy. Yeah, it's still a little bit difficult. In the 4 and 5-color decks, sometimes you have to think about which of your color combinations you need to go and get for your exact colors in hand. Sometimes, very rarely, you'll be screwed, but fetches, a game of Magic the Gathering with and without fetches is just a night and day difference.
Yes, it is.
So if you're trying to have a 3, 4, 5-color cEDH deck and want to buy these cards, the fetches will be a monumental investment in the power level of your deck.
Correct.
And speaking of, when you're casting, you don't cast lands. When you're playing your fetches and you're activating them, sacrificing, paying 1 life, and searching your library, you have to have something to find. And the first thing that we would recommend that you buy in order to find are the Shockland cycles. They have both typings. You have a Swamp Mountain, and then it can enter the battlefield tapped, or it can enter the battlefield untapped if you pay 2 life. We're a 40 life format. Paying 2 life to get an untapped land is not that expensive of a cost whatsoever. These cards will big time up the power level of your deck compared to not having them, because every single other option from a fetchable dual land perspective will enter the battlefield tapped for you.
Yep.
unless you really want to play those terrible Battle for Zendikar lands that require you to have a lot of basics in play first.
Don't play those.
Not exactly counting those on our cEDH podcast
Yeah,
today.
don't play those. Those
I have
things are
seen
trash.
those in some 2-color decks. I'll have you know.
No,
Don't play those in your
don't play
2-color
those.
decks either. But it was a Tainted Pact mana base, Ryan. We're really digging the dish.
I don't care.
I know. But,
put snow-covered swamp and regular swamp. There you go. Problem solved.
The shock lands, they're again, they can get a little on the pricey side because they are ubiquitous across. They're often
All formats.
They're often if they're legal in standard, there'll be 4 of playables across all of standard. They're massively played in modern, somewhat played in legacy, played all over the place at EDH. As far as land goes, these really hit the combination of accessibly priced because they're reprinted very often. There's a lot of shocklands out there in the world, and very powerful. The 2-life downside is a downside compared to the original duels, but it's a little price to pay when we have 40 life to start with.
Correct. There's nothing else to say about shocks. Everyone knows what shocks are, and they're great. They're what you should have. I think you should have the fetches before you have the shocks, in my opinion. But the shocks would be the very next thing I would purchase on this on this list of cards you must own. All right, so let's get into our next one, and that is what we would call the ping lands. These are the ones that you pay a life or they do a damage to you at the cost of a mana of any color. They are mainly Mana Confluence and City of Brass. Basically, you can get any color. They come into play untapped, and they cost you 1 life, which is so insignificant, like you said, in this 40 life format. I would say on a much more tertiary levels, you might want to do some of the other pain lands. These are things like your brush land and whatnot, but those would be much, much lower on the list. I actually would not recommend those for just having as a must-own card. They're not super expensive. They were reprinted recently in Dominaria United, I believe, and so they are a lot more accessible.
They're quite fine for like 2-color decks.
Yeah, for a 2-color deck, you want to have them. They're fine. They're definitely not must-own cards, but I would definitely say Mana Confluence and City of Brass are in that must-own list because they tap for any color. So they fix your mana immediately. They enter untapped. You can use them right away. They're very good cards. They're used in every format. That's a reason that they have the price tags that they do. But they have been printed enough times to make them at least widely available, so it doesn't make it prohibitively expensive. But yeah, the ping lands are very, very, very good. There's also 2 others that I would consider as a tertiary, but they're they're somewhat affordable. There is Exotic Orchard that has been reprinted in basically every single commander set that is out there. Like they're like 50 cents. And then there's Forbidden Orchard. Forbidden Orchard is it's a little bit more expensive because it just hasn't been reprinted as much. It's the one that allows you to tap for any color and you give your opponent a 1/1 spirit. But basically, these are kind of the ones that I would consider as they're called rainbow lands. But ping lands and rainbow lands, these are the ones that we would say are the ones that you should probably definitely own because they fix your mana in a very easy way.
Yeah, these lands with a little bit of downside. They each have their own unique downside. Confluence and Mana Confluence and City of Brass, they damage you in return for the mana of any color they give you, which I just said 2 mana in a 2 life in a 40 life format ain't that much, and it's not. And these only deal 1 damage to you, but it can add up. If the game doesn't end really quickly, you'll find by the end of the game that your Confluence did 10 damage to you over the course of the game.
I've never seen a Mana Confluence do 10 damage.
It's not that much, but it can happen.
5. I've seen 5,
exactly.
maybe 6 in a long game. Yeah,
It can add up.
It can.
But in the same, sometimes you can get in weird situations where your Exotic Orchard, it only taps for mana that lands your opponents can create. So you can get yourself in awkward situations where, if you're playing at a pod with a 3-color deck and 2 4-color decks, then your Exotic Orchard will probably be quite good for you. You can get into pods where, there's that 2-color deck that's missing a mana color somehow, and there's that 1-color deck, and there's that 3-color deck, and this actually only makes 2 of my 4 colors, which is still a fine place to be, but it's not fixing your mana with the promise of a true rainbow land.
Or it's your only land in an opening hand and you're going first. You have to pitch that hand.
Yep. And also Forbidden Orchard, quite good in probably everything except for Tim the Dex. I still see Tim the Dex playing it, which is fine, but giving an opponent a 1/1 is a small downside. It's not huge. Forbidden Orchard, probably actually the better land over Exotic Orchard on the average day. But these all give you a lot of mana fixing in return for a little bit of cost. Notably, also not fetchable. So you kind of have to happen upon them, which is not the best for a land. But, you know,
we demand a lot of our lands.
It's true.
All right. So the next one we have are ones that are more recent additions, but are already more expensive than some of the things we've mentioned before. Those are Otawara, Soaring City, and Beseiju, Who Endures. These are spells disguised as lands. They get around silence effects. They get around rule of law effects. They are extremely hard to interact with the exception of super niche cards that no one runs. They're just amazing cards. And we think that if your colors run them, you should have them in your deck. If you're running blue, there's no downside to running Otawara or Soaring City. There isn't. It enters untapped. It's legendary, but who cares? We're in a singleton format. So it's not even enters as a tap land, so there's no downside there. And you can use its channel ability to interact in meaningful ways during certain, during opponent's turns or your own turn or whatever that might be. It's same thing with Beseiju. Somebody silences through Underworld Breach. Oh, well, guess what? Now you're not just yielding and letting them win the game. If they're trying to wheel you or something like that, you could have
you could run them.
You could Beseiju their Underworld Breach. And so these are extremely powerful, and they count as spells more than lands. And some people even are like, oh, you had to play Beseiju? That's brutal. Because you were like, you usually want to use those for their channel abilities. Powerful lands. They're so unbelievably great.
Yeah, these are, in my opinion, kind of just like must-buys that you should pick up. They're not that pricey, and in return, you'll basically get 2 very powerful spells for your decks. If you can play these cards, I think they are very worth the $10-$15, whatever they are now.
They're like 40 or 50, aren't they?
Never mind. Look, they were $10 the day the set released, Ryan. I don't know what you want from me. Sure.
Okay, yeah, like Otawara, at the time of this recording, it's less than $20, but Beseiju is more than that. hovering around the $40-ish range.
We're so good at our job here at the Playing Power podcast. But yes, these pick up Otawara. Just buy an Otawara right now. It'll be great in your blue deck.
It's a really good card. Buy Beseiju too. Yeah.
And a little bit less of a buy this card, but when you're playing this card, you should. It feels bad when you have to play it for a land. But if these are your only option for a land drop in your hand, you should probably just play them. If you need to, but also
it's got the flexibility of being a land too.
Yes.
So and what other spells in this game do that? Not many.
Yep.
Which is really, really powerful. You got your modal MDFC cards
and MDFC cards, the modal dual side face cards. Yeah. But those people play those cards. We can look at those as for an example. Actually, some people play Amiria. Some people play Shatter Skull Smashing.
A lot of red decks play Shatter Skull. Yep.
Actually fairly low quality spells, but you can kind of just freebie include them because they have a mountain on the backside pretty much.
Yeah. There is no opportunity cost in your deck building to run MDFCs. And just like there's no opportunity cost to running Otawara and Beseiju in your decks. We didn't put every single one of these 5 channel lands on here because some of them are, whatever.
The rest of them are a lot more situational than these.
Exactly. They're a lot more narrow, but these are just these catch-all, absolutely goes in every blue or green deck. And there's no opportunity cost to running them. You can have a land that taps for green, enters untapped, so you can use it the turn, so there's no tap land downside, and just very, very powerful. And they have, like I said, the channel ability. So good. Such good cards.
Exactly. And this is the end of our list of lands that we think that you should pick up for your cEDH deck. These are the most important cards to have for your cEDH collection. You'll notice what we did not include. Here's an honorable exclusion for you, listener base, and that is the original cycle of dual lands: Tropical Island, Volcanic Island, Bayou, Scrubland, etc., etc. These cards are very strong. They're very strong lands, especially once you get fetches into the mix. Go and fetch an untapped dual land onto the battlefield with 0 downside. Very good.
Nobody's arguing how powerful they are.
Yes, but I would go so far as to say that you should spend money on almost every single other card that we have talked about so far in this podcast episode, and all of the cards that we will talk about in the future about most important cards to have in your cEDH collection before you start buying duels. Once you have fetches and shocks and some of these other very powerful lands, the difference, the power level difference compared to money spent is actually like so fairly minimal that the bang for your buck is just so much greater with all of these other cards. A tropical island, it's at its lowest price that it's been right now in a long time. I'm fairly confident talking about this. A tropical island will set you back like $600 minimum. Maybe you could get a damaged one for 500, 550. A damaged, revised volcanic island. Sorry, unlimited. They're not in revised. In unlimited, yeah, they are. They're in revised.
They're in revised. Yeah,
the rest of the reserve list stuff isn't in revised, pretty much. The Power 9 stuff isn't in revised. A revised, like damaged volcanic island, you'd be lucky to get one for $500 right now. And these are the lowest prices they have been in a long time. They were, I bought my tropical island. I have a nice minty revised tropical island that I got a good deal on at the time for $700. It's probably still worth $700, but dual lands are not cheap. And in return, you get a card that is a 2 life paid better upgrade over a shock land, which we already talked about. So
you can buy a Watery Grave for $10 or an Underground Sea for $700.
And instead of buying that Underground Sea, you could buy a Mana Crypt and a Soul Ring and a Mox Opal and a Jeweled Lotus and even a Grim Monolith. And you could probably fit a Gemstone Caverns in there too. You could buy those 5 outrageously powerful cards, or you could buy an Underground Sea.
And save yourself 2 life when the Watery Grave doesn't come into play. It's like, that's not worth 2 life. And that's the thing. This is an intentional omission. If you told us to rank like the number 1 through the number 50 of the most important cards you should have on your list, I would rank niche cards over dual lands, like random niche things that are like 50 cents or $1 over a dual land. They are at the dead bottom of the list. They are on the list, but they're at the dead bottom because they're just not worth it. You could buy half of a list for the price of 2 dual lands or something. Like, it's just so unbelievably unaffordable for so little return. There are cards in here that are expensive. We talked about the Mox Diamond being kind of a centerpiece of how expensive some of the stuff can be. But Mox Diamond isn't a dual land. It does so much more than a dual land does. And so I would say you should get Mox Diamonds before you get dual lands. And once again, you're still, restricted to the color identity of that dual land. So if you decide to be in Grixis, but then you decided to pivot over to a different one, whoops, not all the Grixis dual lands work. So if you led with dual lands, you invested so much money in something that you may or may not end up using in your decks themselves. Speculation, finance, all that kind of stuff aside, we're not talking about the investment value of this. We're talking about actual cEDH playables. Dual lands just aren't worth it, in my opinion. And I don't recommend anybody get them. If it's the very last card that you want to get and you want to make your deck 100% real and stuff like that, dual lands would be the basically the bottom 5% of cards you should buy, in my opinion.
Yep. If there is any card that I'm always going to tell people to just proxy your duels, man. Just proxy the duels.
Proxy your duels. Yep.
I don't care how big of a hang up you have about proxying or how big of hang up some of your friends have about proxying. Convince them to just let you proxy your duels.
Or just don't play with them. Exactly. Convince them to let them proxy. Oh, you only play with cards you own? That's fine. I'll play with Watery Grave and I'll still have just as powerful a deck.
Yep.
The dual land isn't the difference between you winning and losing a game. I'm sorry. You can at me below in the comments and stuff like that. But as far as a return on investment of your money, dual lands just aren't it from a play perspective.
And I think the real funny thing is, like, at the end of the day, really what they do is they just kind of make your fetches better. Like, if you have an Underground Sea and a Watery Grave and you really need another double black land, like being able to crack another fetch to go and get another blue-black duel, which is like the Watery Grave, is quite good. But that's the funny thing. Like, independently, they're quite good cards. They just really make fetches way better. But your fetches are still pretty cracked with just shocks.
Yeah. And if you're really, really hurting, put in a basic and a snow covered basic. So you have 2 fetchables. I know a snow covered basic isn't as good as an underground sea. I'm not arguing that. If we're talking about density of making your fetches good, fetches are already good. They don't need that much more help. And spending, $700 plus on a dual land is not what makes this deck go from losing to winning. And that's a common fallacy I think that people have. They think that, oh, once I get that dual land, I'll be able to finally compete at the tables. No, get better at playing first. Then go win a dual land and then put it into your deck. Like, that's not the difference between you losing and winning a game. I'm sorry. It's just not.
Well, now that we have the signature Ryan rant, TM, out of the way for this episode, that means it's time to wrap it up. How do you feel about owning cEDH cards in your cEDH deck? I know that a lot of people really like owning cards. I'm a collector. I own a lot of Magic the Gathering cards, but I still proxy a lot. How do you feel about proxying? Why do you feel the way you do about proxying, whether you're for it or against it? Which of these cards would you like to buy next? If you're investing in your cEDH collection, which one of these cards are going to pick up next? We would love to hear about all of it.
Yep. And also, this is only part 1 of 2 episodes on this, because there's so much to say about this, and there's a lot of things that we would consider, cards that are really worth buying. And we could talk for a 3-hour episode, or we can break this up into multiples. So that's what we decided to do with this particular episode. So stay tuned for the next one as well. And Cal, go ahead and lead us out.
Everybody, if you enjoyed listening, make sure to give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast aggregator. You'd be surprised how much it helps. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and more. All links are going to be in the episode notes or in the YouTube description. That about wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Tune in next time when we talk more about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.